Bonjour à tous, en attendant Pablo Iglesias qui est en train d'arriver.
Good afternoon. While we are waiting for Pablo Iglesias to arrive, I will begin this press conference. So I will now give the floor to the head of the GUE group, Gabi Zimmer.
Ja, guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to this press conference. We're waiting for Pablo Iglesias from Podemos, the Secretary General of Podemos. He is also a member of our group, of the GUE NGL group. But it's a great pleasure to be able to have the Vice President of the Parliament, Zimmer-Iglesias-Papadimoulis, here with me, also a member of GUE NGL, and the head of the delegation of Syriza in the European Parliament and in our group. You know that tomorrow and day after tomorrow there will be two very important conferences taking place at European level, which, from our point of view, will most certainly lead to a whole series of consequences, particularly for the way in which we work in the European Union at the moment. So it's not simply a meeting where amongst each other we start sort of elbowing each other out and to take up certain positions and how these positions are established in the European Union. It's not a question of power. It's not a power game, whether Mr. Juncker can get Mrs. Merkel to move into the background so that the Commission can take some more of the limelight. I have the impression that under some of those responsible in the European Union, well, some of them haven't really understood that this is not simply a crisis of the European Union or a political crisis, but basically that the economic and financial crisis are very closely linked to a crisis of democracy in the Union, and the decisions that will be taken in the coming days, the way in which one deals with the Greek debt issue, and the way in which one has understood the outcome of the Greek elections. We are not prepared to carry this burden of this debt. This clearly shows that there is a doubt. There is the structures of the European Union are clearly called into question. And if you have not understood this, well then you're also putting the European Union at stake. And as a matter of fact, the federal German government, Mrs. Merkel, particularly ever since 2010, in her politics, in her strategy, when she finally took up a position, she was only interested in two issues, two questions. The first one was to explain to the voters in Germany that those who take up loans or hand out these loans, they don't have any kind of obligation. They're just fully entitled to get a repayment on their loans, and that there is no doubt about the fact that these loans need to be repaid. And Mrs. Merkel has fully misunderstood the issue. I mean, what can we do to make sure that we can continue deepening the European Union and strengthening the European Union? How can we do this jointly, and how can we come out of this economic and financial crisis? This was simply not understood. No difficult questions were put before the German electorate, and now I believe one is simply stuck in this corner. So this is going to be a major challenge for Mrs. Merkel. And it will also be an issue to see whether, to what extent in the Union we can make progress jointly and not drive each other into a corner. Thank you.
Pablo Iglesias.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. We have a very clear message for the governments of Europe, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission. Take the hand that the Greek government is stretching out to you. In the inauguration speech by Alexis Tsipras, there were two very clear messages. The first is that our fundamental criterion is to find a mutually beneficial solution both for our government and for our partners. And the second message was that we want to pay the debt. Nobody can aspire to claim that there are not two conciliatory messages. The response of the European Council was, here's our offer, nothing, absolutely nothing. Give up the program of your government and do exactly what led your country to disaster, just like it has led various European countries to disaster. The situation that has arisen is completely anomalous, and the healthy correction that the European Central Bank had begun to engage in by buying states' debt directly seems not to be valid for the Greek government, specifically when it's one of the political forces that said that a central bank should protect the banks that support their citizens. Finally, we find ourselves with the European Central Bank buying debt, but it seems that the government of Greece does not deserve the same consideration as the rest of European governments do. I don't think that complies with European values and democratic normalcy. In Greece, we Democrats thought that it was a good idea that there should be elections. When there is an election, when there's democracy, if something is not working, it can be changed. And the three great problems of Greece, which are the three great problems of Europe, inequality, debt, and unemployment, were not being solved with the austerity policies patronized by those who are still enclosed in a dogmatic corner. Democracy means when you do something wrong, you can change it and do things differently. That's what the Greek government is proposing. Specifically because those austerity policies did not work. They did not make the Greek debt go into a situation that it was better than that of before. It was not useful to reduce unemployment or in reducing inequality. Inequality grew, both in Greece and in other countries. And currently, a greater lack of confidence is ensuing. A greater lack of confidence in European institutions. That's normal in democracy. When the forces that have governed until now are not capable of solving citizens' problems, it's completely reasonable that the citizenry may opt for other paths to take. So I think it's very important that those who have failed should admit that things can be done in a different way, and they should grasp the hand that is being stretched out to them. Nobody can claim that the proposals by the Greek government, given the current circumstances, are not reasonable. They have proposed a bridge to comply with the obligations that are incumbent upon any government in a state of national emergency. They have claimed that the payment of debt needs to be linked to growth. That's the only realistic way for debt to be payable. I believe that we're not at a juncture in which we should talk about authoritarianism or dogmatism or despotism in Europe. Instead, there should be a reasonable change that benefits citizens, because what is at stake is not just the fate of the government of Greece, it's the future of the European Union. And to continue to insist on a call to responsibility, instead of that, take this hand that the Greek government is stretching out to you. Thank you. I would like to begin by thanking all those who, before and during and after the elections, expressed their solidarity with Syriza and their satisfaction in the formation of the new Greek government. And I would like to assure them that we will do everything that we can to respond to this responsibility of ours. We are working intensely in order for the coming days, when the Eurogroup meets tomorrow, and when the summit takes place on the 12th, and the Eurogroup meeting takes place on the 16th, so that all of these things will lead to a mutually acceptable solution. We claim that the interest of Greek society is the same as the interest of the entire Eurozone. We are working intensely in order to have a win-win solution, which will help not just the Greek people and the Greek economy and society, but also the Eurozone itself in facing the problems that it's suffering from. The response that the Eurozone will give to the response to the Greek crisis in the coming days and weeks constitutes a criterion. In ancient Greece, we called this a Lydian stone, basically a cornerstone, for how it will deal with the problems that the Eurozone already has. During the last 5 years, investments in the Eurozone went down by 15%. Unemployment grew. Poverty grew. In the last month, inflation grew as well. And all the Nobel laureates in economy say that the Eurozone is the weak link in the chain of the global economy. So there is the risk of a new cycle of recession. President Obama intervened twice by pointing out the need to find a compromise solution. Not because President Obama became a member of Syriza, but because he is worried that such a crisis, if it intensifies, will affect the American economy as well. Since I wish to leave enough time for you to ask us some questions as representatives of the media, let me mention in brief the issues where I think we can find a solution that is acceptable to everyone. First, we want not new loans, but the possibility for the Greek economy to breathe and grow. The best way to pay off your loans is to have sustainable development in your economy. And with sustainable development of our economy, we undertake the commitment that we will apply a generous program of reforms in administration, taxation, the broader public sector, the reduction of bureaucracy and corruption, the confrontation of the phenomenon of oligarchy, which has to do with the unequal distribution of wealth and does not befit a European nation. Second, we will engage in a realistic reduction of the unreal primary surpluses that the Troika agreed on with the Greek government. It's unrealistic for a crippling economy to have a surplus that is 4.5% of its GDP. We could accept something on the order of 1%, 1.5%, 2% with well-arranged public finances. And we do not want to be a burden on anyone, on any European taxpayer in regard to the Greek debt. We do not want to loan in order to throw money, obtain loans in order to throw money out the window. We want the Eurogroup to implement what it decided on November 28th of 2012, which is to take additional measures in order for the Greek public debt to become sustainable. Now it's 180% when it was 127% earlier. There are ways to reduce the debt. The Bruegel Institute, which is based in Brussels, has submitted specific proposals. The only thing missing is the necessary political will, and we are working on having that present. Thank you.
Merci Dimitris. On passe aux questions.
Thank you, Dimitris. Let's move on to the questions. Please introduce yourself and use a microphone.
Do you think Greece is preparing the way for Spain? Do you think Greece is preparing the way for Spain?
I'm going to answer the question in Spanish if it's not a problem for you, because I want to be very, very precise. Creo que
I believe that nobody has done their duty, the duty of the Greek citizens. It's a good thing that that is the case, and nobody will do the work of the Spanish citizens. These are political and economic situations that are very different. We have a shared collective will for change and for the defense of social rights and democracy in Europe. However, just like Greece deserves a sovereign government that protects its citizens, Spain deserves that as well. And we, in Spain, will need to take the reins and to solve our own issues just as the Greeks have done.
You said last night, during your meeting with Falciani. What has been said, or what is the link, what is the connection between Podemos and Falciani?
el señor Falciani.
Mr. Falciani is going to cooperate with us. We're going to establish a working group with him in order to develop a package of messages against tax fraud and tax havens, which are two of the problems that most affect European citizens and that have affected the type of European governance that has appeared. That is, the increase in inequality and a lack of social justice. Mr. Falciani is an expert on this, and he's also a brave person who has done what many governments should have done, which is to investigate and find out that ultimately we're all being robbed. We need to take measures that will attack this attack against democracy. Citizens should be able to count on the support of Mr. Falciani as a consultant who will help us develop a package of measures that we will try to apply whenever democracy will allow us to do this. It's an honor for us.
I am Tassos Ioannidis from Greece, Nerit. The question is for Mr. Iglesias and Mrs. Zimmer. In Greece, the new government is seeking a political agreement with Europe in a new deal, or a program so-called bridge. An argument of Athens is that it is not only political change in Greece, but the failure of European policy. What do you think on that? And in the call of Athens for a win-win solution, Germany, it looks, tightens the rope in Greece and therefore in all European South, demanding a strong observe of the European rules in relation to the rescue of member states. Do you think that it could keep alive a scenario of a Greek exit or not?
Ja, aus meiner Sicht geht es darum.
Well, I think, from my point of view, it's not just a Greek problem or a Greek solution. If you look at people who are governing in the Federal Republic, other member states, they are all really upset by this, really by being stung. Latest thing I saw in the German media was that the Merkel government is afraid it's going to lose control, and that's basically it. Looking at further development and how we develop further in the European Union, are we just going to look at a sort of kernel of the European Union, a central bit? How people are going to bear in mind other economic and social concerns? Is it basically just economic, or is it economic plus human and for everybody? It's got to be a social one, a democratic one, an ecological union. We think also sustainable economic growth. We think that's self-evident. And to that extent, the points which have been raised now against the backdrop of what the majority of people are asking for in Greece, for a change in politics, shows that basically it's a question of principles. The way that Europe has developed so far has now got to be changed. It's more than just a haircut for Greek debt or more flexibility for Greece. It's a question of principle. Basically, what role does the Stability and Growth Pact play? What about economic coordination? What about the social aspects of how human beings actually live together in the European Union? I think we've got to look at things once again and differently, new solutions, get back from the toxic responses we've given to these problems in the past. It's just given rise to real damage. The way we have tried to fight the problem, I mean, it's given rise to oppression and suppression of the poorest people, and a lot of people live in poverty.
Sí, creo que esto no es.
Yes, I believe that this isn't a problem between the German government and the Greek government. This is something that affects all of us Europeans and has to do with the survival of the European Union as a political project. And we're not the only ones saying that. This has been openly recognized in the inaugural session of the European Parliament. The European political project is at stake. The questioning of this European political project has to do with policies that have failed. And I think that nobody should be ashamed Mrs. Merkel should not be ashamed to admit that she has done some things that have affected the European project negatively. This is not just my own opinion. The crisis of trust in the European political elites is a reality that we can only envision by looking at what has happened in the elections of many European states. I think that it's actually good news that a pro-European democratic political force like Syriza won the elections in Greece. I think that the democratic message that the Greek citizens have given should be taken up by all the pro-European families. Now that we're in a moment at a crossroads where there are many leaders threatening Europe, when the Greek government is proposing the possibility of a reasonable solution that may satisfy both the Greeks and their European partners, I insist that this is not just a problem between Germany and Greece. It's a problem that affects all of us Europeans. They are proposing ways to proceed to the recovery of a European project based on democratic values and social justice. That's why it's important to call for responsibility on the part of those who are insisting on dogmatic positions that have shown their failure. They themselves are putting at risk nothing less than the European project. And I think that all Democrats with different political traditions, with different political orientations, at the moment we all have the obligation of telling the dogmatic people, of telling those who have failed, that they should think and recognize that things can be done in a different way. I think that it's obvious that the proposals that the Greek government are making are not extreme proposals. They're very reasonable, and they're ways to deal with the current situation. To respond to this type of proposals with arrogance and threats, or to try to insist on the same formulas that led us to failure, I think that that is an act of irresponsibility that threatens to deepen instability and the inability to govern Europe. And therefore we have to say things about that. Last week, the magazine Spiegel, in its keynote article, the keynote article, its electronic version, it invited Chancellor Merkel to engage in an honorable compromise with the Greek government. We are not pursuing an anti-German alliance. We want a new agreement for growth of the economy, both that of Greece and of Europe, for the reduction of unemployment and for the reinforcement of social cohesion. These are values that are present among the founding treaties of the European Union, but are absent from the policies that have been applied, that are being applied. We respect all the countries that are participating in the European Union and European society and all the rules involved, but the Troika and the catastrophic one-sided austerity are not included in those.
Grazie.
Thank you. From the agency EF, the message of the tax fiscal message is very important. And Minister Montoro said that this list is just a sort of an aperitif before the real program comes in. And Bonavera was talking about 6 million euros or something. Okay. And those being used for financing the party. There's a problem there.
Before Pablo replies to this question, maybe I'd really like us to talk about Greece rather than about Spain. Thank you so much for that answer and for that question. As far as Mr. Montoro's comments are concerned, well, I would like the Minister Montoro, I'd like him to be the minister of all Spaniards and not just the minister on behalf of his own party. We Democrats defend institutionality above the party line. A minister needs to take account of the interests of citizens. And I think the comments that he's made, I think the very recent comments he made, make him into a minister who uses the instruments of the state and the institutions to do something that doesn't really lie in the hands of the institutions. As to your question, as to Mr. Monedero, well, I think Mr. Monedero has clearly explained and he did answer any of the questions that were put to him. And I think one of the basic values of Podemos and the members of the of Podemos is that our pockets are transparent. Any of the information that you may need from us, you can read on the website, or you can read this in registers which are public. Now, anyone who may believe that you have you're dealing with illegal finance, well, then maybe you want to take this whole issue to court, and that hasn't happened yet. Thank you.
My
question is for Mr. Papadimoulis, first of all. I would like to know what we can expect tomorrow in the Eurogroup. A waiting posture, a compromising posture, or a call for support from your other European partners? And also, I have a question for Pablo Iglesias. Do you believe that other countries in Europe, like Spain, for example, can and will and want to help Greece? Tomorrow, in the Eurogroup, I'm expecting a productive discussion. There has been preparation for this, intensive preparation. The Greek government has done a lot of work to help tomorrow's discussion be productive, and I think that tomorrow we will find convergence. There will be agreements, but there will also be some points where where we're still far apart. And my estimate is that following the summit, which will also discuss this issue naturally, the next Eurogroup meeting on February 16th will be the Eurogroup meeting where there will be a mutually acceptable solution. The Greek government has engaged in great efforts to this end. We are not blackmailing anyone, but as you understand, we can't accept the idea of anyone blackmailing us. Mutual interest requires a solution and not a rupture, and that, I believe, will be achieved.
Well, on your question, I think this should be a clear will of all the countries of the south of Europe. I think all of these countries should try and find forms of governance which revert these policies, these austerity policies, which have been so bad for our countries. Unfortunately, the attitude of our government at the moment has been that they're very arrogant and not very crafty. You saw the Prime Minister of my country travel to Greece to support the losing candidate in the Greek elections. I think our government should show the common sense that Obama showed. You can't strangle countries. The austerity policies which prevent domestic demand, which prevent growth, are incompatible to achieve a level of prosperity so that countries can actually pay their debts and meet their obligations. So it is certainly common sense that is necessary. I certainly agree with Mr. Renzi's comments too, because he's understood, he's gone further than just ideological positions. The austerity path that has been taken does not help us solve our problems. We need to move in a different direction.
Sì, Marcello Campo, Agenzia ANSA. Le chiedo...
Marcello Campo from ANSA. Can I put it in Italian and get a reply in Italian? Talking about a common fund for Southern Europe. Pepe Grillo appealed to Podemos and Syriza to have a conference against austerity as a sign of solidarity. Would you agree? Well, thank you. That's the first I've heard of that appeal. Seems worthwhile, but nevertheless we'll have to look at it when we get a response to our thinking, you'll be the first to know.
Parlato di Renzi.
Well, now Renzi. Now, the support which he gave to Tsipras in meeting the ECB, was that well conceived? Well, yes. I think in politics you can put things right. I think that there's a certain amount of illusory thinking going on. I think the European governments, not just those of the South, have to take on board that the common feeling at the moment is that austerity and this attitude of the ECB does not help the construction of the European project.
We are interested in every voice that asks for an end to this destructive policy of unilateral austerity and will turn us towards growth. The south of Europe is suffering more from this policy, but we believe that all of Europe has something to gain if this policy of austerity is ended and if we turn towards growth with social cohesion. And for this reason, we're not interested in a southern alliance against the center of Europe and northern Europe. We want a pan-European alliance for the end of austerity and for the growth of the European economy as a whole. And as far as the decision of the European Central Bank is concerned, it was evidently a political decision. It was an act of compulsion. Just like with political criteria, Frankfurt decided on one thing. It can, with the same criteria, interpret a positive decision on February 16th and turn the taps back on. I think that that will be a good thing for the European economy as a whole and for the Eurozone as a whole. Yesterday, the International Labour Office presented a study which said that a Grexit scenario, which in my opinion does not exist and has no probability of occurring, would cause a great increase of unemployment in Germany and have a domino effect that would dissolve the entire Eurozone. Therefore, it's in everyone's interest to promote an honorable compromise, a solution, not a breakup.
Thomas Meyer vom Standard aus Österreich. Wenn Sie erlauben, möchte ich meine Frage auf Deutsch.
If I can put my question, Thomas Meyer from Austria. I speak German. We speak German in Austria too, you know. My question goes to Vice President Papadimoulis. Now, just beforehand, you said once again that the Troika has come to an end. The Greek, the Greek government doesn't accept negotiating with the Troika. The Prime Minister said this several times. But the Troika is the EU Commission, the Central Bank, and the International IMF. And that was elected for five years ago because there's no other way to set up aid payments. But Troika just negotiates for the powers which allocate European monies. And you can't do anything in the Troika which hasn't already been decided or given the blessing by the Eurogroup. So what I don't understand, what's going on? Does that mean that the European institutions, the Commission and the Eurogroup, reject having this person as a negotiating opposite number? Because the finance minister said that is going to have bilateral negotiations with individual member states. So you've still got the member states, so I don't really understand what's going on. Is the negotiating on or not? What's happening?
Let me explain this. First, since you represent the Austrian media, let me say that we are particularly happy about the constructive initiative adopted by Austrian Chancellor Weimann. With his initiative, he met with our Prime Minister Tsipras in order to try to find an acceptable solution for the coming days. Let me also explain that we don't have any problem, any difficulty with discussing with the Commission, with the Eurogroup, with the IMF, of which we're a member as a country. What we said has no reason to continue is a discussion with the employees and representatives of these three institutions who formed a group with a specific mandate to implement, without the possibility of negotiation, a program that we all officially or unofficially accept that and admit that has failed. Commissioner Moscovici, in response to my own question, said that the Commission is already studying the end of the Troika and its replacement by other institutions. Our logic is very simple. Politicians talk with politicians and technocrats talk with technocrats. Let me remind you that Mr. Juncker as well, as a candidate for the presidency of the Commission during the electoral campaign period, before the European elections, said that, in his opinion, we need to finish with the Troika scheme. And the European Parliament itself, with the report that approved in the previous legislature with a great majority, it accused the Troika of a lack of democratic accountability and seriousness. And there was also a decision by the European Court of Justice which forbids the European Central Bank from participating in a Troika-type scheme. And if you write in your media that the Troika is nearing its end, you will not be wrong. Thank you.
Okay, jetzt ist die Übersetzung durch. Nur eine ganz kurze.
Well, just a brief comment. I know that Dimitris Papadimoulis is actually linked all this up to the European Parliament. And let me just point out that our criticism over the last legislative period was really that for us, the Troika, that for us in the Parliament, the Troika was simply difficult to control. Who was a member of the Troika, they said, well, this is a group, and they didn't really have to pay any kind of responsibility to any group. So this is a non-democratic body which cannot be controlled, can't possibly be a partner. Well, we can only agree with that. The Commission has to come to the Parliament, and the Parliament can control the Commission. The role of the International Monetary Fund is something that needs to be rediscussed, and even Mr. Juncker says that possibly the Troika is a tiny bit old and old-fashioned and may be part of history. Last question.
Good afternoon, Mr. Papadimoulis. Glikos from northern Greece, from Halkidiki specifically. There's a rally in the stock market in Greece. There is a favorable climate, and some elements of the Greek proposal have been leaked out, and I'd like to know whether you can confirm that they are the ones that will be discussed in the Eurogroup tomorrow. We support the effort to have a productive solution, but the negotiations are carried out by the Greek government. So I can't confirm or deny anything. What I can tell you is that serious productive work is being carried out, and we are optimistic that a positive result will be achieved rather soon.
On a dépassé depuis longtemps.
Well, I'm afraid that we've really gone beyond our time, which was half an hour. Thank you so much. And the speaker thanks the interpreters.